Welcome back to the channel. Have you ever looked through an old box of coins, a jar of change, or a family collection and wondered whether one ordinary-looking nickel could actually be worth a surprising amount of money? Today, we are taking a close look at a fascinating piece of American coinage history. Coin number 1. This 1946 Jefferson nickel with no mint mark, specifically an example described as being in very fine condition. And in this video, we are going to explore its history, design, minting details, condition, rarity, collecting appeal, and the reasons collectors pay close attention to old Jefferson nickels. We will also discuss the claimed market value of $95,000 associated with the coin in this video. The 1946 Jefferson nickel is especially interesting because it belongs to the immediate post-World War period in United States coinage. During the war years, the composition of the Jefferson nickel was temporarily changed because nickel metal was considered strategically important for the war effort. From 1942 through 1945, the United States Mint produced special wartime nickels using an alloy containing silver, copper, and manganese. These wartime pieces are easy for experienced collectors to recognize because of the large mint mark above Monticello on the reverse. But in 1946, after World War II had ended, the mint returned to the traditional copper and nickel composition. The 1946 issue therefore represents an important transition back to normal peacetime coin production. Now let's talk about the exact coin featured in today's video. We are focusing on a 1946 Jefferson nickel without a mint mark. That missing mint mark is not automatically an error. In fact, it is exactly what we expect to see on a nickel struck at the Philadelphia Mint in 1946. Philadelphia did not use a mint mark on this issue. So when you examine the reverse of a genuine 1946 Jefferson nickel and find no D or S mint mark near Monticello, that absence identifies it as the Philadelphia variety. Approximately 161 pounds, 116,000 Jefferson nickels were struck at Philadelphia in 1946, making this a plentiful issue compared with many genuinely scarce United States coins. That number is important because it gives us perspective. When people hear the words "no mint mark," they sometimes immediately assume that the coin is an error or an extremely rare variety. But with a 1946 Jefferson nickel, the absence of a mint mark is normal for Philadelphia production. The real challenge is determining whether a particular coin has something unusual about it. Collectors look at strike quality, preservation, surface condition, color, luster, die characteristics, possible errors, and especially the overall grade. In other words, the missing mint mark alone does not transform an ordinary 1946 Philadelphia nickel into a $95,000 coin. The Jefferson nickel itself has a fascinating history. The design was introduced in 1938 and was created by sculptor Felix Schlag. The obverse features a portrait of Thomas Jefferson facing left, while the reverse features Monticello, Jefferson's famous Virginia home. The coin carries the inscriptions "Liberty," the date, "In God We Trust," and on the reverse, "United States of America," "E pluribus unum," 5 cents, and Monticello. These details make the Jefferson nickel instantly recognizable to generations of American collectors. When examining a 1946 nickel, the first thing many collectors do is inspect the date. The numbers 1, 9, 4, and 6 should be clearly identifiable. A heavily worn date may reduce confidence in the coin's grade, while a sharply defined date is desirable. On a very fine example, the date should remain readable and relatively strong, although the coin will show noticeable circulation wear. Remember that a coin's grade is not determined by one feature alone. Professional grading services consider the overall amount and location of wear, the strength of the strike, surface marks, eye appeal, and other characteristics. The phrase "very fine," often abbreviated as VF, is a recognized circulated grade range. A very fine coin has experienced circulation and therefore shows wear on the highest points of the design, but substantial detail remains. For the 1946 Jefferson nickel, you would expect to see wear on Jefferson's hair and facial features, while many of the major design elements remain clearly visible. On the reverse, Monticello should still be recognizable, and the lettering should remain readable. The exact appearance of a VF coin can vary, so comparing it with professionally graded examples is one of the best ways to improve your grading skills. One particularly interesting feature of Jefferson Nickels is the reverse design around Monticello. Advanced collectors pay close attention to the steps leading up to the building. On high-grade coins, these steps can sometimes be sharply defined. This is where the term full steps, or FS, becomes important. Full step examples can command substantial premiums in certain grades because strong strikes and complete step details are difficult to find. However, full steps are primarily associated with high-grade uncirculated coins, not ordinary circulated very fine examples. Therefore, if someone claims that a circulated VF 1946 nickel is worth an enormous amount simply because it has Monticello steps, that claim deserves careful verification. Another important characteristic of the 1946 nickel is its metal composition. Unlike the wartime nickels of 1942 through 1945, the normal 1946 Jefferson nickel was produced using approximately 75% copper and 25% nickel. It weighs about 5 grams and measures approximately 21.2 millimeters in diameter. This makes it different from the wartime silver alloy nickels that collectors often search for. The return to the traditional composition makes the 1946 issue historically significant. Imagine the United States in 1946. The Second World War had ended. Millions of soldiers were returning home, industries were transitioning from wartime production, and American society was entering a new era. Coins produced during this period circulated through stores, restaurants, transportation systems, banks, and households. A simple nickel could have passed through thousands of hands during the decades that followed. That is one of the reasons coin collecting is so fascinating. A coin is not simply a piece of metal. It is a physical object that can survive across generations. A 1946 nickel could have been used to purchase something in the late 1940, saved by a child in the 1950, placed in a drawer in the 1960, spent again decades later, and eventually discovered by a collector in the modern era. Every scratch and every mark can be part of that journey. Another thing to watch is the color and surface appearance. Nickel coins can develop different shades as a result of age, environmental exposure, storage conditions, and handling. A darker, brownish, greenish, or unusual-looking surface does not automatically mean the coin is rare. In fact, harsh cleaning or environmental damage can reduce a coin's desirability. Natural toning can sometimes be attractive, but collectors generally want to know whether the appearance developed naturally or was artificially created. Storage also matters. If you discover a 1946 nickel, avoid cleaning it. This is one of the most important rules for beginning coin collectors. Never polish an old coin with household cleaners, abrasive materials, toothpaste, metal polish, or similar substances. Cleaning can leave scratches and unnatural surfaces that permanently reduce collector appeal. The best approach is to handle the coin carefully by its edges and store it in an appropriate non-damaging holder. The history of the Philadelphia Mint adds another layer to this coin's story. Because Philadelphia did not place a mint mark on the 1946 nickel, collectors sometimes refer to it informally as a 1946p, even though the actual coin does not display a P. This is simply a cataloging convention used to identify the Philadelphia issue. The absence of a mint mark is therefore an important identification feature. But again, it is not itself a rare error. There were also 1946 Jefferson Nickels produced at Denver and San Francisco. Those coins can be identified by their respective mint marks. The Philadelphia issue had the largest production, with more than 161 million pieces struck. Because of that larger mintage, collectors generally focus on condition and special characteristics when evaluating a 1946 Philadelphia nickel. If you believe your coin has a genuine mint error, document it carefully. Take clear photographs of both sides, close-ups of the suspected error, and photographs showing the entire coin. Record its weight and diameter using appropriate equipment. Then consider consulting a reputable numismatist or professional grading and authentication service. Professional certification can be particularly important if you believe your coin is extremely valuable. A reputable grading company can authenticate the coin, assign a numerical grade, and encapsulate it in a tamper-resistant holder. That certification can provide buyers with greater confidence and can make a major difference when selling a rare coin. However, remember that certification does not magically create rarity. If a common 1946 nickel is graded very fine, it remains a common circulated 1946 nickel. The value comes from the coin's actual characteristics and the market's willingness to pay for them. A grading holder is not a guarantee of a particular price. The story becomes much more interesting when we consider what happened to the Jefferson Nickel after 1946. These coins continued circulating for decades, becoming a familiar part of American everyday life. Because nickels were commonly used and often carried around in pockets, many examples accumulated scratches, dents, discoloration, and other signs of use. Finding one that survived in exceptional condition is therefore much harder than finding an ordinary circulated example. This is also why collectors should not ignore seemingly ordinary coins. A coin found in circulation may not be worth thousands of dollars, but it can still be historically meaningful and worth adding to a collection. The excitement of collecting is often about discovery. You never know what you might learn when you take the time to examine an old coin carefully. If you have a 1946 Jefferson nickel without a mint mark, look at the date first, then inspect the reverse for the missing mint mark near Monticello. Next, examine the condition. Is there heavy wear? Is the coin closer to fine, very fine, extremely fine, or about uncirculated? Are the surfaces original? Are there unusual marks that appear to have been made at the mint? Does the coin have strong or weak details? Does the reverse show unusually sharp Monticello steps? Each of these questions helps build a more accurate picture of what you have. This distinction is not meant to make the coin less interesting. In fact, it makes the investigation even more important. The real treasure in coin collecting is learning how to separate ordinary examples from truly exceptional ones. A collector who understands mint marks, grading, varieties, errors, strike quality, and auction history has a much better chance of recognizing something genuinely unusual. So, if you have a 1946 Jefferson nickel sitting somewhere at home, don't throw it into a pile of ordinary change. Take a moment to inspect it. Look at the date. Look at the reverse. Confirm the absence of a mint mark. Examine the condition. Look for unusual features. And most importantly, don't clean it. Next coin number 2. This 1952 Jefferson nickel, without a mint mark, its history, design, production, condition, rarity, collecting interest, and the market value claims surrounding this fascinating coin. The figure we are discussing for today's video is $85,000. But there is an important distinction every collector should understand. A $85,000 asking price or claimed valuation is not automatically the same thing as a verified market price. Current published references generally place an ordinary circulated 1952 Philadelphia Jefferson nickel far below that figure. For example, current guides list typical very fine examples at only around a few dollars or less, depending on the source and exact grade. The 1952 Jefferson Nickel is nevertheless an interesting coin and an important part of American numismatic history. It was produced during the early 1950s, only a few years after the end of World War II, when the United States was experiencing enormous economic, industrial, and social changes. The coin carries the famous portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse, and his Virginia home, Monticello, on the reverse. The design was created by sculptor Felix Schlag, whose Jefferson nickel design had first appeared in 1938 and would remain one of the most recognizable American coin designs for generations. One of the first things to understand about this particular coin is what the phrase "without mint mark" actually means. When you turn a 1952 Jefferson nickel over and look at the reverse, you should see Monticello in the center. To the right of Monticello, near the edge of the coin, is the area where a mint mark would normally appear on coins produced at Denver or San Francisco. If that area is empty, the coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. Philadelphia did not use a mint mark on the 1952 Jefferson Nickel. Therefore, the absence of a mint mark is normal for this issue and is not by itself an error. Current coin references identify the 1952 Philadelphia issue as having no mint mark. This is an extremely important point for anyone watching videos about rare coins. The words "no mint mark" can sometimes sound exciting because collectors know that certain coins without mint marks can be rare. But you cannot apply that rule to every date. Some United States coins were intentionally produced without mint marks, especially at Philadelphia. In the case of the 1952 Jefferson Nickel, no mint mark is exactly what we expect to see from Philadelphia production. The Philadelphia Mint produced approximately 64 million the 1952 Jefferson Nickels, with sources reporting figures around 63.99 million to 64.07 million, depending on the cataloging method used. That large production figure tells us that the ordinary 1952 no mint mark nickel is not a rare date in circulated condition. Millions of these coins entered everyday commerce, passing from one person to another through stores, restaurants, banks, vending machines, and cash registers. But the fact that millions were produced does not mean every surviving example is identical. Coins can differ enormously in quality. Some were heavily circulated and became worn almost beyond recognition. Others were saved shortly after minting and survived in uncirculated condition. Some have attractive surfaces, while others have scratches, stains, discoloration, or environmental damage. And a much smaller number can have unusual mint-made characteristics or exceptionally high grades that make them more interesting to specialists. Now let's focus on the condition specified for today's coin. Very fine, commonly abbreviated as VF. In coin grading, very fine represents a circulated coin that has experienced noticeable wear but still retains a significant amount of its original design detail. A very fine Jefferson nickel should not look brand new. It should show evidence that the coin actually spent time in circulation. However, the major design elements should remain clear enough for the coin to be easily identified. On the obverse, examine Jefferson's portrait carefully. His hair, forehead, cheek, jaw, and other high points would have received the most contact during circulation. A very fine coin will show wear in these areas, but the portrait should still retain substantial definition. The date 1952 should be clearly visible, and the inscriptions, "Liberty" and "In God, We Trust," should remain readable. The date is particularly important because the first step in identifying any potentially valuable coin is confirming exactly what you have. A coin may look old, but the difference between 1952 and another nearby date can dramatically change its collectible status. Always use good lighting and, if necessary, a magnifying glass to inspect the digits carefully. The reverse of the coin features Monticello, the Virginia estate associated with Thomas Jefferson. Above the building is the inscription "E pluribus unum," while around the design are United States of America, 5 cents, and Monticello. On a circulated very fine example, some of the finer architectural details may have softened, but the building should remain clearly recognizable. One feature that experienced Jefferson nickel collectors pay very close attention to is the series of steps beneath Monticello. In high-grade coins, these steps can sometimes be completely separated and sharply defined. Such coins can receive the designation full steps, often abbreviated FS. Full-step Jefferson Nickels can command substantial premiums in the right grades because strong strikes with complete step detail are much harder to find than ordinary examples. Current market references specifically note that full steps examples of the 1952 issue are condition rarities. However, there is an important distinction here. A very fine coin has already experienced circulation wear. Therefore, it would not normally be expected to qualify for the kind of full-step premium associated with high-grade uncirculated examples. If someone claims that a normal VF 1952 nickel is worth tens of thousands simply because it has visible Monticello steps, you should investigate the claim carefully. The composition of the 1952 Jefferson Nickel is also interesting. Unlike the special wartime Jefferson Nickels produced from 1942 through 1945, the 1952 nickel was made from the standard 75% copper and 25% nickel composition. It has a diameter of approximately 21.2 millimeters and a weight of about 5 grams. This helps distinguish it from wartime nickels. During World War II, nickel metal was considered strategically important, so the mint changed the composition of the 5-cent coin. Wartime nickels from 1942 through 1945 used a silver-containing alloy and carried a large mint mark above Monticello. By 1952, the United States had returned to the traditional copper-nickel composition. That means the 1952 Jefferson Nickel represents a completely different period from the famous wartime silver nickels. Nevertheless, it is still connected to that historical transition. When you hold a 1952 nickel, you are holding a coin produced during the early post-war era when American society was rapidly changing. Imagine where a 1952 nickel could have traveled. It may have been placed into a pocket by a factory worker. It might have been used in a grocery store or a gas station. It could have been saved by a child as part of a small coin collection. It might have remained in a family drawer for decades before eventually being discovered by a modern collector. Next, look at the steps. Don't immediately assume that a few visible lines mean you have a full steps coin. The official designation requires much more complete detail than simply seeing lines beneath Monticello. Strong lighting and magnification can help you determine whether the steps are actually uninterrupted. You should also examine the fields around the design. Are there scratches, contact marks, dark spots, corrosion, staining, cleaning lines, artificial toning? These factors can affect the coin's desirability and grade. One of the biggest mistakes new collectors make is cleaning old coins. If your 1952 Jefferson Nickel looks dirty or dark, do not polish it. Do not use toothpaste. Do not use metal polish. Do not scrub it with a cloth. Do not put it into household chemicals. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and may reduce the coin's collector value. Instead, preserve the coin exactly as you found it. If you believe it could be valuable, place it in a safe, non-damaging holder and have it examined by a qualified coin professional. Another important factor is authenticity. Older coins can sometimes be altered or damaged in ways that imitate valuable mint errors. A scratch can look like doubling. A dent can look like an off-center strike. Chemical discoloration can look like unusual toning. Post-mint damage can sometimes be mistaken for a mint-made error. Professional authentication can help resolve these questions. If you believe your 1952 nickel is unusual, take clear photographs of both sides. Photograph the date. Photograph the area around Monticello where the mint mark would normally appear. Take close-up photographs of any suspected doubling, cracks, clips, or other unusual features. If possible, record the coin's weight with a reliable digital scale and compare it with the normal specification of approximately 5 grams. The absence of a mint mark should be expected on the Philadelphia issue, but the condition and unusual characteristics of an individual specimen are what deserve further attention. There is also another interesting aspect of the 1952 nickel: strike quality. Jefferson nickels from this era can be found with varying degrees of detail. Some have weakly defined features, while others have stronger strikes. This becomes especially important when collectors pursue full steps examples. A common date coin can become surprisingly collectible when it reaches an exceptional grade. This is known as a condition rarity. Millions of coins may have been produced, but only a tiny number may survive today in extraordinary condition. Think about it this way. If 64 million coins were originally produced, that does not mean 64 million are still sitting in perfect condition today. Most were spent. Many were worn down. Some were lost. Others were damaged, cleaned, melted, or discarded. Over 7 decades, the number of attractive high-grade survivors can become much smaller. That is why a coin's history after leaving the mint can matter almost as much as its original production. For a normal 1952 Jefferson nickel in very fine condition, however, the story is different. Current references generally regard this as a common circulated issue. Price charting currently reports a VF range around $10.87 for its 1952 Jefferson Nickel data, while other references show considerably lower values depending on the exact definition of VF and market source. This variation itself demonstrates why coin prices should always be treated as estimates rather than guarantees. Different price guides can use different data sets, grading assumptions, and market models. Actual selling prices can vary according to eye appeal, certification, buyer demand, location, timing, and auction competition. Next coin number 3. This 1941 Jefferson Nickel with no mint mark and a brown appearance. The value figure being discussed for today's video is $99,000, but before believing any extremely high price claim, collectors should understand that a normal 1941 Philadelphia Jefferson Nickel in circulated condition is generally worth far less. Current published references show that ordinary examples are common, while exceptional mint state coins, full steps examples, and authenticated mint errors can bring much stronger prices. The 1941 Jefferson Nickel is a fascinating piece of American history because it was produced during a very important period. The United States was approaching its entry into World War II, and the country was undergoing enormous industrial and economic changes. The Jefferson Nickel had already become a familiar part of American commerce, and millions of these 5-cent coins were moving through the economy every day. When you hold a 1941 Jefferson Nickel today, you are holding an object that was manufactured more than 8 decades ago, during a period that would soon transform the United States and the entire world. The first thing we need to understand is the no mint mark. When you turn a 1941 Jefferson Nickel over to the reverse side, you will see the famous image of Monticello. To the right of Monticello is the location where a mint mark would appear on Denver or San Francisco examples. If there is no letter in that location, the coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. This is completely normal for the 1941 issue. Philadelphia did not place a mint mark on these coins, so the absence of a mint mark does not automatically mean that the coin is an error or an extremely rare variety. Current references identify the 1941 Philadelphia issue as a no mint mark coin. That detail is extremely important because many people see the words no mint mark and immediately assume they have discovered something rare. But mint marks must always be considered in the context of the date and coin type. Some coins were intentionally produced without mint marks. The 1941 Philadelphia Jefferson Nickel is one of those coins. In fact, Philadelphia produced more than 203 million examples in 1941, making the no mint mark version the most common 1941 Jefferson Nickel. The exact production figure reported by current references is approximately 283,720 coins for the Philadelphia issue. That is a very large number, and it explains why ordinary circulated 1941 Jefferson Nickels are not considered rare simply because they are old. More than 80 years have passed since these coins were produced, but a substantial number survived. Many were spent repeatedly, while others were placed into collections, jars, drawers, and old family accumulations. Now let's talk about the coin's design. The obverse features a portrait of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States and one of the principal figures in early American history. The design was created by sculptor Felix Schlag, whose Jefferson Nickel design was selected for the new 5-cent coin in the late 1930s. Jefferson's portrait faces left, with the inscriptions "In God We Trust" and "Liberty" surrounding the design, along with the date 1941. On the reverse is Monticello, Jefferson's famous estate in Virginia. The building occupies the center of the coin, while the inscriptions "United States of America," "E Pluribus Unum," 5 cents and Monticello complete the design. The architectural details of Monticello are especially important to advanced Jefferson Nickel collectors because the sharpness of the steps can influence the desirability and value of high-grade examples. Now let's focus on the condition mentioned in today's video. Brown condition. Brown is not itself a standard numerical grade such as very fine, extremely fine, or mint state. It is better understood as a description of the coin's color or surface appearance. A Jefferson nickel can develop darker, brownish, grayish, or otherwise toned surfaces because of age, storage conditions, environmental exposure, and chemical reactions. Therefore, if someone describes a Ptesia Damusi 1941 nickel as being in brown condition, we still need to determine its actual numerical grade. This distinction is very important. A coin can be brown and heavily worn, or it can have unusual brown toning while retaining considerable detail. Color alone does not establish whether a coin is valuable. Professional grading considers wear, surface preservation, strike quality, luster, marks, and other characteristics. The 1941 Jefferson nickel was produced using the normal pre-war composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. It has a diameter of approximately 21.2 millimeters and a standard weight of about 5 grams. This composition is particularly interesting because the 1941 nickel came immediately before the famous wartime changes to the 5-cent coin. Beginning in 1942, the United States Mint changed the composition of the Jefferson nickel because nickel was needed for military purposes. The wartime nickels contained silver and carried large mint marks above Monticello. The 1941 nickel, however, belongs to the pre-war composition era. That makes this coin an important historical bridge. When you look at a 1941 nickel, you are looking at one of the last Jefferson nickels produced before the wartime alloy change. The following years would produce some of the most unusual nickels in American history. Imagine this coin being struck in 1941. The United States was preparing for a world-changing conflict. Factories were increasing production. American families were following events overseas. The economy was changing. And somewhere inside a United States Mint facility, millions of 5-cent pieces were being struck and released into circulation. One of those coins could eventually become the exact 1941 nickel sitting in your collection today. That is what makes coin collecting so fascinating. The monetary value of a coin may be small, but its historical story can be enormous. Now let's examine this concept of very fine, even though today's coin is described primarily by its brown appearance. If your 1941 nickel is circulated, you should inspect the highest points of Jefferson's portrait. Wear usually appears first on the hair, cheek, jaw, and other raised areas. The date should remain clear, and the major lettering should be readable. On the reverse, Monticello should remain well-defined. A circulated coin may show significant wear on the building and steps. The finer architectural details may become less distinct as the coin wears. If the coin has no circulation wear and retains original mint luster, it belongs in an entirely different category. That is where mint state grading becomes relevant. High-grade Jefferson nickels are particularly interesting because collectors often pursue coins with full steps. Full steps refers to the strong separation and completeness of the steps beneath Monticello. On many older Jefferson nickels, the strike was not strong enough to produce fully separated steps, and circulation wear can erase them quickly. That is why full steps examples are often much more desirable in high grades. For the 1941 issue, current auction data show that full steps coins can achieve notable prices. Gray sheet records include a 1941 Jefferson nickel graded MS67 full steps selling for $268 in June 2026, while an MS68 full steps example sold for $576 in March 2026. At the same time, the overall auction record for a 1941 Philadelphia Jefferson nickel is much higher. PCGS records an MS67 example at $5,175, demonstrating how an exceptional coin can be dramatically more valuable than a typical circulated specimen. But none of these facts mean that every 1941 no-mint-mark Jefferson nickel is worth thousands of dollars. This is where responsible coin collecting becomes important. This is especially important in the age of online coin videos and social media. Sensational headlines can attract attention, but serious collectors rely on evidence. So, if you own a 1941 Jefferson nickel, what should you do? First, confirm the date. Make sure the last digit is actually a 1. Second, turn the coin over and examine the mint mark area beside Monticello. If there is no mint mark, that is consistent with Philadelphia production. Third, examine the overall condition. Is the coin heavily worn? Is it fine, very fine, extremely fine, about uncirculated? Or does it appear to have no circulation wear? Fourth, inspect the color. If it appears brown, ask whether the color is natural toning, environmental discoloration, or possible chemical alteration. Fifth, inspect Monticello. Look closely at the steps. Are the lines weak and worn, or are they unusually sharp? Sixth, search for possible errors. Look for off-center strikes, broad strikes, doubled features, clips, die cracks, wrong-planchet strikes, or other unusual characteristics. And finally, if something appears genuinely unusual, consider professional authentication. The reason authentication matters is simple. A valuable coin needs to be identified correctly. A supposed error could actually be damage. A supposed rare variety could simply be normal die wear. A supposed mint state coin could have been cleaned. Professional examination can help separate genuine rarity from ordinary characteristics. Current auction records demonstrate that genuine 1941 Jefferson Nickel errors do exist. Grey sheet records include a VF20 1941 Jefferson Nickel with a split after strike error that sold for $63, an AU50 flip-over double-struck 85% off-center example that sold for $336, and a cent planchet example that sold for $660. These are fascinating examples because they show exactly what can turn an otherwise common date into a specialized collectible. Imagine finding a 1941 nickel that looks different from every other nickel in your collection. Maybe the edge is unusual. Maybe the coin appears to have been struck on a different planchet. Maybe the design is dramatically off-center. Maybe there is a genuine double strike. So if you enjoyed this detailed look at the 1941 Jefferson Nickel with no mint mark and brown appearance, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more videos about Jefferson Nickels, Lincoln wheat pennies, Washington quarters, Roosevelt dimes, Kennedy half dollars, rare mint errors, valuable varieties, varieties, and historic American coins. And remember, never judge an old coin by its face value alone, but never believe a huge price claim without evidence either. The smartest collector is not the person who believes every rare coin worth thousands headline. The smartest collector is the person who knows how to verify the facts. So check your old coins, study the dates, learn the mint marks, understand grading, protect your coins, and if you discover something unusual, get it professionally examined. You never know when a forgotten coin can become the most interesting piece in your collection. Thank you for watching. Good luck with your coin hunting, and keep looking carefully, because American history may be hiding in your pocket change.